Hey there! Welcome to episode 1 of Perception Design Demos, where our team at Perception demonstrates how we design, build, and create incredible animations, motion graphics, visual effects, and more. Today, we'll be going over how Perception designer and animator Vivian Amaro crafted this custom particle-themed Perception logo animation using Cinema 4D and Adobe After Effects. Let's get started. We're going to start our project in After Effects. After creating a new composition on this blank screen, we're going to select a solid and add some color to it. For this, we're going to select dark blue. From here, we'll create a new solid, make it black, and add our effect. The effect we're going to be using is a plugin called Trapcode Form. This is what you'll get at first when you open Trapcode. By using these particles, you can actually create a bunch of different things with it. Since we're using the Perception logo, we're going to import our design. Using Form, we can import in our own 3D models. Now, we're heading into Cinema 4D, where we made our own mock-up of the logo using several cylinders. From there, we export the logo and follow the program's prompts to save. Moving back into After Effects, in your project, we're going to import the file. After it's imported, we'll drag it into our composition. This is what we'll see at first, but we don't need to keep it visible. We'll uncheck it and go back to our form. Here, we'll have all of these options to play with. The first thing we're going to do is adjust our form. The default of form is a box and a grid, so we're going to change it, using a 3D model as our base form. Because we're going to use our logo, we're going to go back to the 3D model settings, open it up, and in Model, we're going to tag our layer called Perception Logo. From there, we see our logo. We're going to create a camera, and then we'll create an orbit null. We often find it's easier to control the rotation or position of the camera using this. Then, we will turn it 90 degrees so we can see it. This is where we're going to start from. We'll call this layer with the form particles in it edges. Because if we go down into our 3D model settings, we can see particle form, edges, and then we also have the option for vertices, faces, and volume. To create that logo, we use 3 of those layers, one for the edges, one for the vertices, and one for the faces. If we start with the edges, we want to make our logo much larger. We can also change the particle density because it uses our geometry as reference. This is the amount of points and divisions that we created in this. so it's going to translate to what we see here. If you want less points, you can decrease the density so you can go all the way down to 30% and you'll see less. But we're going to put it at 90 for now. Then, one other thing we'll do is change our particle. We don't usually like the feather on the particle, so we put it to 100 and we'll keep the size of our particle. Then, from here, we're going to duplicate this using Ctrl-D. We'll name this Vertices. And then in here, we're going to change this from edges to vertices. If we toggle this down, we're only going to see what we're doing with the vertices. We'll only see the points of the logo. Now, we're going to see something interesting as soon as we start playing with our camera and our angles. We're going to create this focus. We'll come in here, and our camera options will pop up. We're going to mess with the depth of field now, so we'll turn that on. We'll change our focus distance. Let's start with 1000 pixels, which is going to make it super blurred. But now what we'll do is bring the logo way closer to us. So let's adjust some of these settings. Now that we adjusted some settings, we're going to bring the logo closer to us. In this position, we're going to bring down the Y value and the logo should shift accordingly. In our animation, we start with a side view of the logo. Because of the depth of view, the particles that are closer to the camera get blurred. The other particles that are farther away are smaller and sharper. We also want to create a sweeping camera movement that makes the logo zoom out and turn. To do that, we're going to find a position we like. We'll start from the end, so where we want the animation to finish. We're going to set a keyframe on our position and also on our rotations. Then, we'll go all the way to frame 10, and this is how we'll work on our animation backwards, or what will be our starting point. We start playing from here to find a good composition of what we want to start with. We're going to turn back on edges here so we have a denser look for this part. And then, on frame 10, which is our beginning of our animation, we're going to start tweaking and adjusting some settings and options. After some tinkering, we're going to adjust our position on the null that is attached to our camera. This is the position that we want to end on. On frame 10 is when we're going to start moving our camera. We're going to start with the logo horizontal to us, and right after that, we're going to enlarge the logo so it occupies more of the screen. What we also like to do, to give it a more cinematic look, is add some black bars around the animation, specifically above and below it. We'll utilize the grid feature to ensure that the bars are evenly sized and spaced. Now, we have our edges and our vertices, and we want to duplicate that again. So, we're going to use faces. If we select our layer and go to this view, we'll see that the logo becomes much denser, because now we're not using each point or each edge. We're using every single face on our model to add particles to it. We're going to disable our depth of field, just for the sake of work visibility. Doing that, now we can see more particles inside of our cylinders, rather than just on the edges of the cylinders. For this, we're going to add 100% random sizing of the particles. It gives the particle formations a more interesting look, because nothing is really uniform, which makes everything more visually dynamic and intricate. Also, the opacity will be adjusted. Now, when we see our logo, we're starting from the side and doing a scooping motion towards our final destination. This is the size that we want our logo to be at the end of our animation. We're going to use the size of our 3D model inside of the form to scale the logo up for the beginning instead of pushing our camera towards the logo. On frame 120 is where we set our camera to reach its final position. We're going to set a keyframe here because this is the size we want it to be, and then on frame 1, we're going to make it much larger. Then, this is when we start seeing more of an abstract pattern, which is how we're going to play with revealing this logo. We're going to do the same thing for our 3 layers of form. Now, we're going to enable again our depth of field and lower our focus distance. We're going to set a keyframe on frame 120. As you can see, the logo is super blurred and out of focus. We'll set another keyframe here, increasing that number, and now we'll see things more in focus. We're going to play around with some settings here to touch up our animation and logo. So now, we want to grab our edges and try to make it look a little less solid. In the same way we added random opacity and random size for the faces layer, we're going to do that to the other 2 layers as well. Then, we're going to start seeing a much better progression towards our final look. Our particles are in place, and what we want to start doing is giving everything a defined look. For that, we're going to create adjustment layers and add some effects to them. The first one we're going to add is noise. Even just 12% of noise is going to really add a bit of dimension. Also, adding a mask will help us out. So if we create a black solid and add a mask to it, invert it, we're going to have just the borders. If we bring our feathered up a lot, we're going to start seeing how our animation will have a focus. We can also play with our mask expansion to see if we want to go a bit more, but we'll make it less so we can still see our corners. Another thing that helps out with our composition is adding a lens blur. We'll apply our same techniques as we did for the vignette. Let's invert our mask and only have these particles on our edges of the frame become blurred out. We're going to bring our feather up to create a good transition, and we'll adjust our expansion. We can always play with how much blur we want to see. If we go up to 40, we'll see how things begin to look very muddy because it's so blurred. We're going to keep it subtle though, for this animation. Now, we're going to add another effect that is a subtle touch, but will bring some dimension to this animation. We're going to add optics compensation. We're going to add it to the same layer we added our noise to. If we go to our beginning, where we see more of the particles up close, we can add our optics compensation. Then, reverse our distortion. This will create some dynamic motion for particles as they enter our frame when the camera moves. Here, we start seeing a bit more of what our final animation will look like. We want to increase the depth of our logo a bit. Let's turn back on our vertices and add an RGB glow effect to the layer with our vertices. This is why we created different layers for our logo, so we have a way to treat them separately and have different looks for our particles. This is a Red Giant plugin called Universe Glow, and there's another one called Chromatic Glow. If we add that, we start seeing a bit of our glow from the final. Now, we'll play with our settings to get everything moving in the right direction. After adjusting some settings, we're going to increase our boost and our intensity. We're also going to increase the size of our particle, which will make this much brighter. It doesn't need to be increased by much, but just a bit will help. We can see our animation approaching its final design. One thing we're noticing is that the beginning of our animation is not in the correct position that we want. We're going to mess around with that to get the right look. With those adjustments, we have more of a sense that the camera is living inside of one of those cylinders. We can now see some of these particles way closer to the camera. We're also going to try and center our logo a bit more. For our chromatic glow that we're using for the vertices, we're going to animate our parameters here so that we can have more control over the way the glow looks depending on the progression of our animation. We want it to be more visible in this beginning frame than towards the middle and the end. By the end, we don't want to see the glow as intense, or else it will obscure the logo. First, let's center our final logo. With everything adjusted now, we're going to make this animation a bit more interesting and work on our glow. But for now, we're going to disable it. We duplicated one of our form layers to create a star background. We'll change it from a 3D model to a sphere layered. From there, we're going to increase the size so it occupies the entire screen. Right now, we're seeing a shape in here because the default gives us 3 sphere layers. Let's try having 2, or even 1. Because of that, we can actually make the particles smaller so that we can see more particles. Another thing we will do is create a mask for those stars because we don't want to see them on the edges. We create a white solid and we're going to add a mask to it. If we show this layer, this is what you'll see. This time, we don't want to invert it because when we alpha matte it, everything that is white is going to stay in the layer and everything that is black is going to disappear. We'll increase the feather to eliminate a hard edge and play with the expansion. In here, track matte. Because our Y solid is on top of our stars layer, we can alpha matte it, and with that, we can see how the transition to the edges disappears. If we undo that to no track matte, this is what we'll see. With that effect, we're trying to have less stars on the edges. Here, we're going to add a white solid that we're going to add fractal noise to. Then, we're going to add a light coming from the distance. The noise is going to make it not so perfect, which makes things really interesting. We're going to do dynamic and change our contrast to 20 and our brightness to 20 as well. Next, we'll do the same thing we did with the stars with the mask. We'll create a white solid. Instead of a big circle, we'll draw our mask in our desired shape. And increase the feather, just so it's more of a transition. We'll do the same alpha matte, then this is what we'll see. In our fractal noise layer, we'll change the blending mode. We're going to play with it to find a look that we like. We want to lower the opacity, and it will be very low, because we just want to give the animation some detail rather than a whole call to attention. We're then going to go back to our fractal noise and increase our contrast so we can see more of that detail of the noise peeking through. We can also go into transform and scale it up so it's more like a fog rather than a tiny noise. We're almost done. One of the last things we have to do is add our glow again. This is going to be our logo animation, which we can keep tweaking and adjusting the look of the particles, the glow, and other details. If we go back here, we're going to animate the intensity of the glow. So in this frame, we see that the glow is too heavy, so we bring the intensity down, and maybe our boost as well. We'll play with both the intensity and the boost. And then, over here, as soon as our logo lands into place at the end, we'll adjust the intensity and boost to 0, so there's no glow overwhelming the logo. We'll increase it for the middle of the animation to create that transition. We're also going to animate the size of our particles, so at the very beginning, we'll get larger flares. We'll animate the particle size, and then we'll finish. Now, after a bit more detailing and fine-tuning, we have our final animation. Thanks for tuning in. If there's anything you want to see the Perception team create, leave a comment down below and let us know. Be sure to like and subscribe for more design demos, VFX, and motion design content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.